And then how you get to the? I heard you were working for Koenigsegg before also, right? One of the most expensive cars now.
This year, the Art in Motion team was 14, 15 cars, quite many.
Okay.
So we achieved about 8 trophies, I think.
Oh,
in
yeah,
total.
just today.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was quite a good result.
Okay.
But also, I think 11 or 12 years old, I built my first home speaker with some old car audio elements. Yeah. So.
Halo teman-teman, selamat datang di YouTube channel Audio Plus Indonesia. Hari ini kita bersama Marian Gadau, pemilik sekaligus desainer dari Art in Motion Sweden. Halo Marian.
Hi Andres.
Yes, it's nice to meet you here. Thank you for joining us. Could you briefly introduce yourself and share your recent achievement at EMA Euro Final 2024, where I saw your car is doing great, I think, last year?
Thank you. Yes, for the first time last year, and of course we had a big competition team this year. So we showed the cars and the products for the first time last year in 2024, and this year the Art in Motion team was 14, 15 cars, quite many.
Okay.
So we achieved about 8 trophies, I think.
Oh,
in
yeah,
total.
just today.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was quite a good result.
Okay. Good.
For a year of the company existence, I think the team has grown quite a lot. And,
Okay.
Quite a good following.
So how did your passion for audio begin, and is there any moment that made you decide to pursue this car audio as professional?
Well, I think it started very early. When I was young, my father had a recording studio in our living room.
Okay.
It was still a communist era of Romania.
Okay.
So this was not completely legal. He was very, very passionate about it, and they had lots of fun. So when I opened up in the evenings or late nights the door, I remember a little bit, even though I was maybe 4, 5 years old, I was very amazed by all these VU meters running around in the night, because they were doing all kinds of recording during the day, and then in the night those were getting replicated. So many reel-to-reel and many cassette recorders, headphones, studio headphones with the big plugs. I was playing all the time and so on. As funny story from when I was little, my father said at 4 years old I was able to put the reel-to-reel play on my own.
Okay.
And I couldn't sleep without music. So I think there's something from that time. And then as early as 14 years old, I was a DJ. Started very early DJing and kind of amateur music producing. I heard my own songs in a few clubs, which was very surprising in my teenager times. But also I think 11 or 12 years old, I built my first home speaker with some old car audio elements. Yeah. So I don't know if it has ever been a decision. It has just happened.
Okay.
At those ages, I was not able to take decisions, but I know what I liked.
So you pursue this until now?
Yes.
You continue this?
Yes.
Good. So you actually grown in Romania?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Sweden?
Yeah, the funny story about that is that my passion and my love has always been about audio. But a second skill came up as an important part of the business while still in Romania, because we always wanted to build these car audio cars and attract higher end customers that could spend more. Actually, my interest was to get the customer convinced to buy the most expensive equipment so I can experience them first and see how they sound.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they were basically funding my dream and also getting enjoyment for themselves. But it was hard to attract those type of customers because they were always scared about the finish details. You know, you cut the door panel to put bigger woofers, you cut the dashboard
Will it
to
be
put
nicer than the original or not?
It can be at least the target in the beginning was OEM look.
Okay.
And that was quite hard. We tried to do that with all kind of stretchy materials and adhesives, and we order everywhere. Then we start working with people. They were doing very nice, stitching and so on, but never at the level I was looking for. Even though I was willing to pay much more than anybody else just to get the result. So we bought a very cheap sewing machine made in China and tested a little bit with some seats, and this started to become more part of the business than the audio world.
Okay.
So that's when, after like 6 years of doing upholstery work, we were getting nicer and nicer jobs. And that was a very important part of it because we attracted high-end cars in the workshop, which came for design, changing leather, changing color, interior, making special design. And then we could always offer a sound system as well. And since the customer was there, can I listen to one car? Yes. So it was even a way to sell car audio to
From
a higher
the
level.
Stitching machine.
Yes, exactly.
And then how you get to the? I heard you were working for Koenigsegg before also, right? One of the most expensive cars now.
That was the moment I moved to Sweden, and I never left because I was minding my own business in Romania, and we had this Instagram channel that was quite popular, and I was speaking to many from the same industry with upholstery and leather and so on. And one of the guys, we spoke for such a long time, but I had no idea he worked for Koenigsegg. He was not allowed to post pictures of what he did, interiors and so on. And then from conversation, they needed help with developing cars and interiors and speed and so on. So I agreed to postpone my business in Romania for a while and move to Sweden and help for a while, for a period of time. And then it ended up to be, I'm still living in Sweden 8 years later now.
Okay.
So I did work for Koenigsegg as head of the interior department. So we took care of production, engineering, and some other stuff. But then after 3.5 years, I started Art in Motion in Sweden, because Art in Motion is a company that was running in Romania before. Okay.
So how did you learn the speaker design? You learn by yourself, or you? How? As any mentorship on? I heard it was done previously, like it's a raw design.
Yes.
Can you tell a bit of that?
Yeah. After moving to Sweden and having a regular day job for the first time in my life, I always had a company since I was very young. So I was used to intense working hours. Entrepreneurship takes a lot of your time, and I always made all of those super nice sound systems for all the people, but never had time to do one for myself.
Okay.
And after moving to Sweden, I decided now it's a good time, since I have a regular working hours and so on, it's a very good time to start doing something for myself.
Okay.
Maybe relax a little bit, maybe see a little bit of the world, and buy a car and focus on building a good sound system for myself. And the workshop that we work now on, it's very close to a friend of mine, where I rented half of it together with him. And I had my car there. And I remember at some point, we on a big table that we do upholstery also on, I think it was over 80 sets of speakers on the table.
Okay.
Yeah, very, very many. And I started looking at speakers and listening to them and looking at the parameters, try to correlate, understand, because I wanted to choose the best for my car. And I didn't care about brands or anything. It was just for my personal taste and use. And I ended up liking some of them very much, but I liked parts of each. So it was kind of 3 of them that I wanted to
combine together.
Yeah. And it started with some cutting and gluing and putting some shims under the magnet and try to fit something together and make everything work in a very Frankenstein way with different parts, from everywhere. But the sound was quite impressive at the end, and I realized at that time that this seems much more difficult than it actually is when you start doing it. The difficult part is to start anything.
Yes.
And unless you start, you have no idea if you could achieve it or not. Obviously, another big story is when I look at Christian von Koenigsegg, working with him. He started from early age doing a car and succeeded. Thomas Hoffmann was one of my mentors, and he started as just a regular artisan, and then so it's
inspire you.
Exactly. I realized maybe I can give it a try, and then ended up being what it is today. And when the sound was so good, we thought maybe in order for people to get the attention of people and actually to be interested and see what is this, should I listen to it, to make them curious, we had to look at the design and how materials are, and also combining good quality materials for both practical sound and visual. And this has always been my passion, and it's related with everything I do, like sound systems, interiors with leather, and a beautifully machined aluminum part is similar to a very nice wrapped leather piece.
So in a simple way, it looks good and it sounds good.
Yes.
It has to be like that, combined.
Yes.
Okay, so Art in Motion, I see you choose the brand Art in Motion. What's the story behind the name, and maybe you have a vision for this brand, Art in Motion?
Yes, this kind of touched a little bit of this when we spoke about it before. I think in any discipline, whether it's sound, design, maybe craftsmanship with leather and anything, in order to get to a very high level result, it's an artistic endeavor involved, because you have to search in yourself and understand, what do I like, what do I want from this product. And it's expressing yourself in an artistic way when you're creating the prototypes in the beginning. Of course, after that, it's more like manufacturing. We're not going to sculpture speakers and so on. But the other difficult part for me was how do I encapsulate all of these disciplines we are doing into one name? Because is it more about leather? Is it more about audio? Is it about cars or mobility in general? Then when you think about it, is our artistic expression into something that is moving, a car, mobility in general. So Art in Motion seemed like a name that I could use for everything I do and I like doing.
So it's an art, but it's moving and motion
Yes.
forever. So your flagship speaker also have a very intriguing name, like the three-way speaker, the time machine. So it must have something correlated with the time or something which is... Well, can you tell the story why it's time machine?
Yeah, since in many years I've been always interested in physics in general, also like interstellar travel, and I love to see all the sci-fi movies and think about what could happen, what could be out there in space, and consume all the information that I can find about this. And while listening to very good sound audio systems, I realized, thinking about it, is not very often, but I'm pretty sure you had that experience where if you're in the room and you close your eyes, you feel like the person is in the room with you singing. The instruments are in the room. And it's hard to not think about that you are transported in the room where the recording is made, because always all recordings are made in the past. There's no way to be in the present with them. So if you see a video on a flat screen, the brain, it's easily, you can't fool the brain that this is reality. But I think when you have this real depth in music, when you have this big size instruments, everything is realistic, everything is very well. If you close your eyes and you don't use one of your senses, you could really feel and believe you are in the room. So it's basically, if the system is very well done, it can travel. You're traveling back in time.
Recording.
Yeah. So Also, a time machine in physical world is not able to travel back in time. So this is a very special time machine.
Okay.
Because you are able to travel back in time and be in the room.
The recording.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, very nice, very nice concept. So
also the amplifier, by the way, which we just released.
Okay.
You saw the name is Pulsar.
So what's Pulsar?
Yeah. Yeah. In order to do any time travel, let's say theoretical, because right now it's not possible, you would need a huge amount of energy. And the highest energy corps in the solar system or in the universe right now are the pulsar type of stars. They are the densest and the highest energy. So also our amplifier, it's quite high energy since it has 5 channels of amplification with separate power supplies in such a small package. And it's quite a heavy amplifier because of that. Pulsar name seem very.
So it's the energy to travel to the.
Because amplify the speakers which are basically the time machine.
Yeah.
Need a power supply.
Power supply. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good concept.
Is driving them.
Okay. Very good concept. So, what components or materials are the key to achieving the time machine things in the speaker? I mean.
Yeah. For me, in general, in sound, the key to unlocking all the details to really make you feel the realism of music and the feeling being in the room, in the recording, has been speed. I try to look at it in all the way possible. And the speed of a speaker, the way, the speed which it can react to, and the freeness of reaction that a speaker can have is the key to that. And in order to achieve that, we had to have very low, lightweight cone, moving mass in general, with a very high energy motor. And again, to achieve that, we ended up using carbon fiber, like titanium voice coils, and the balance between all of those was quite difficult to achieve. And at the same time, for example, with the mid-range, we still like the sound of paper. Somehow, the sound of paper gives it naturalness and realism. So we combine that with sandwiching with multiple pieces of paper with carbon fiber to stiffen it. But still, the connection between the voice coil and the cone of the speaker is on paper. So there's a lot of elements that went into this, but in general, it's high amount of energy with a very low mass. And then the third part, which was the hard one, is to make everything work together in real life.
Correct.
Because then you get a speaker that is not so well behaved. So you need to put everything back into a smooth playing device. And
this year, we saw in your booth today, you launched the Continuum line. So what motivated this new, more accessible line?
The problem was that I realized I went a little bit far from where we started.
Yeah.
My idea in the beginning was just to create very good sound in my own car. So I didn't have any thoughts about price at all. And of course, during development, I realized it will end up expensive. Then when the product was good, I realized it has to be everything about it good, like packaging and all of that. And everything increases price. So then it becomes inaccessible to many people, which in the end, it makes the product not being enjoyed by so many as it could be.
Yeah.
So then we realized how many of the parts that make the time machine are not so extremely expensive. Some of them are very expensive, and we try to see like how big percentage the high expense part brings to the sound and so on. And I think we realized we could achieve 80% of the sound quality by 25% of the price if we eliminate some parts that are increasing the
so
value so much.
You scale down, but I saw you still use the same cone.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. We tried to use parts that we already developed, and it took quite a long time and a high amount of financials to get them developed to that level. And since they're already developed, we can just use them, and higher numbers of the same parts make everything more accessible. And then we just bought some available of the shelf parts and use, for example, aluminum formol instead of titanium, and just ferrite magnets instead of neodymium, which is quite a big difference in price.
Yes.
So making all of this much more accessible, so more people can experience the time machine feeling. But at the same time, we call it continuum because it's a continuation of the work that started before the time machine.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very good. Everything has a concept.
Yeah.
So you also have subwoofers, and it was impressive, the 8-inch A2 and the 10-inch Femto. What are their strengths and how do they differ, the 8-inch and the 10-inch? I mean, how you purposely intend the 8-inch for the front sub, or it can be used for the rear sub, and how about the 10-inch?
Basically, what I see in the market and where my philosophy differs a little bit is that many times in a car, the space available for a subwoofer is quite small.
Yes.
So whether you don't have the physical space, whether the enclosure space is too little, many manufacturers decide to make speakers that can play in very small volumes.
Yes.
Which, in my opinion, it's a way to design a speaker and you can make it sound good, but it's still a slight compromise. So I was thinking, why do we need such big subwoofers to play in small boxes, which in the end can have the same result in terms of let's say, SPL. When you have a small subwoofer, smaller cone, smaller subwoofer, playing in the same size of box. So if you have 15-liter available, it's not necessary to have a 10-inch. You can have a 7.5-inch, like our time machine. Make sure the excursion is very linear. And at the same time, in order to achieve that, then you have to make sure that the magnetical parts of the motor are able to be stable for such a long excursion. And then you have to make sure that the elasticity or the mechanical parts can have very linear movement. And then everything scaled up to the speaker you have seen now. And of course, this ended up in a very expensive speaker as well. We use a huge amount of demodulation parts with copper and aluminum inside the motor, and it becomes very complicated. Is the use of these radial magnets, which need to be magnetized together instead of...
Oh, you use a radial magnet?
Yes.
Impressive. So after you have the 8-inch, why you have the 10-inch? I mean, it's...
We already had developed the motor, which was the most important part, and we realized maybe some people just want more, because the small 7.5-inch, it's very usable as a front or rear sub. There would be no system that I can think of where this is too limiting.
Okay.
The only limitation could be, of course, high SPL at low frequency. Yeah. So with the FS of 23, the small subwoofer can play all the frequency range. But the bigger 10-inch can extend the excursion even more. Now, instead of 18 X Max, we have 23. And using the same motor with a little bit higher voice coil, we can get higher BL, so a lot more energy. And FS is 19. So
19?
Yes. Very, very low FS. The speaker behaves extremely linear from very low frequency to very high. Basically, in the cars we use it, we almost don't need to touch EQ at all. In many other situations, we have to sometimes push a little bit the low frequency to get linear. So it was just the idea of, since all the time machine went so ridiculous into extreme performance, why not have a 10-inch as well with the same philosophy, especially since the motor is already developed, and that was the highest cost.
And so it plays actually lower than the 7.5-inch actually, right?
Yes. Okay. And it plays it more effortlessly, the low frequencies, because the excursion.
And I saw in some of your cars, maybe a few of your cars, they have a new 8-inch mid-bass also, right?
Yes.
So the time machine will come with the 8-inch mid-bass.
Yes, since we have developed the small 7.5-inch subwoofer.
Okay, 7.5 inch.
Yes, the 7.5-inch or 8-inch. I choose the exact size, but in many terms it's an 8-inch because everybody. So since the subwoofer was already developed and the moving mass of our cone and assembly was very low, it was 32 grams for the subwoofer, I realized with a little bit of work we can get slightly less moving mass. We can change only the voice coil and the spider system, and we can have a very, very potent woofer combination. While realizing that, at the same time, is also the concept of a 6.5 inch, which has limited excursion, limited cone area. The only way to achieve some output is to have a higher QTS, since doors and infinite baffle applications require control of that movement, but also introduce some distortion. So yes, this is a compromise everybody uses in car audio. It's normal to use it, but we just thought, why not try having a woofer with a lower QTS, with a very low distortion, over a long excursion, very linear movement, and just see how that behaves in a door or in a free air environment. And we were quite surprised. In all the cars, it was way easier to have the woofers, even though use them in the doors, playing on the dashboard.
Yes,
perfectly aligned with the rest.
That's what when I listen, it's that the car that used this is all there. So there's nothing in the on the fit. So it's
and many people speak about doors not being an ideal environment, which is true. Of course, a door will always add some resonance, but with a lower QTS driver, which with that motor size adds some weight and stability to the whole system, the movement of the door is much less. And sometimes a lot of the distortion we heard was part of the design of the woofer as well, not just the door. So this was surprising to get the results. Plus, of course, the total output of a system can be much louder.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, teman-teman, hari ini kita sudah mendengar banyak hal tentang Art in Motion, dari speakernya, time machine, sampai subwoofernya, dan tipe baru Continuum. Bagi yang mau bertanya, silakan tulis komen di bawah dan menghubungi kami. Sampai ketemu lagi.